Hello and welcome. From heading a country to running a United Nations agency, she has proved her strength of character and decision-making skills time and again, and her ability to survive the cutthroat world of politics while she tries to promote opportunities for women. This week on 101, meet the former New Zealand Prime Minister and Administrator of the United Nations Development Programme, Helen Clark. An early and demanding life on a farm with few luxuries and little entertainment taught her the value of a strong and close family and the need to just get the job done. Helen Clark didn't get a real taste of the big world until she reached her teens, when she went away for school. Politics became a part of her studies largely by accident, but Clark soon found it fulfilled her desire to take action on a number of issues about which she felt strongly. By the age of 31, she'd been elected to New Zealand's Parliament and was soon engaged in policy development and advocacy on both international and domestic affairs. As the country's first elected woman leader in 1999, Helen Clark led a period of significant economic growth and stayed for 3 consecutive terms, after which she was appointed as Administrator of the United Nations Development Programme in 2009, continuing her pioneering path by becoming the first woman to head the UN agency. Well, Helen Clark, I'm delighted to have some time with you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now, as you've moved into developmental issues after a very long and successful career in politics, how have you adjusted to the dependency on political will to get things done as opposed to having the political clout to do them?
I guess I was always dependent on political will of the people around me in New Zealand, what the traffic would bear, if you like, with reform agendas. So nothing much has changed, and you bring the same leadership skills to a position like the one at UNDP as you had as Prime Minister of your own country.
When you look at the way the world is shaping up, do you get any sense the developed world has really let down the developing world? Has it sort of moved on and not really given it the opportunity it should have?
Well, I wonder if it's thinking big enough, because it's not enough just to meet overseas development aid commitments, and many of those aren't met in any case. It's really a question of the rules of the game. What about climate justice, the fact that the world's poorest people are suffering the most from the impact of changing climate, and yet they've done really nothing to cause it? What about the world trade rules, which are not fair, but you've got a round that's completely stuck? So I think in the jargon, people talk about policy coherence. You need a whole lot of things going in order to really give developing countries a fair chance.
Now, of course, I know you believe strongly that culture shapes national identity, and I wonder how much you think that has changed with the globalization of the world, with the way that the cultures are being impacted by the development of satellite TV, movies from the West coming in, for example, the internet. How much does that still apply?
I think it makes one's own culture even more important, because there is a global culture. Sometimes you look at the way countries portray themselves to the world, and there's so many similarities. Everybody's kind of going after the same market, the same youth global culture. But that makes the things which are unique about each of us so important, and I think that countries should have strong cultural policies and bring out those positive things which are the point of difference.
When it comes to when you're doing developmental work, what do you think is the most misunderstood thing? Is it that people simply think money is the cure?
Could be, because it's not just about money. Money always helps, but it's also about leadership. It's about vision. It's about having the capacity to put your dreams into action and operation. So yes, we can always spend more money, but we need to spend it well.
And that's the thing, I think, when you look at the responsibility of the developing world, you were saying that many of the goals are never met, or at least haven't been met. What can be done? How can you provide the kind of leadership that will encourage people to take responsibility?
So we can help identify the underlying factors which mean that there haven't been as much progress as you'd like to see. Take, for example, the fact that the deaths of mothers haven't dropped as was envisaged in the Millennium Development Goals. That's not just a matter of lack of access to services, although that's serious. It's also an issue of the status of women. Does a woman have the power in her family, in her home, to be able to walk out the door and access those services? Really, the empowerment of women and girls is a big part of the breakthrough strategy we need.
Now, I'm going to ask you to perhaps blow your own trumpet a bit here, but what do you think are the strong points you have that will help you to achieve the goals you want to?
When I came to bid for the position, I said, I'm not a development practitioner. I haven't spent my life in developing countries. I have worked closely with many developing countries in the course of my life. But what I think I bring is an ability to turn ideas into action. I do bring leadership skills. I have run a country. I've run a cabinet of ministers. I've negotiated with political dialogue with opponents. I've tried to bring a whole country behind an agenda. And I think those things are very relevant to advancing the development agenda.
Well, let's look at where it all started. You were born in Hamilton, and you grew up on your family's sheep and cattle farm just west of the city for the early years up till you were about 12 years old. How was that a sort of very isolated environment? Was that in shaping you as a girl? Was that very much, or were you part of the urban culture too?
Oh no, there was no urban culture. We did live on what was then a remote backcountry farm. So there was yourself, your parents, perhaps cousins who'd come from the city in the summer holidays. I went to a little school. It was a 4-room school. And we were lucky to get to the big city, which was probably about, 30,000 people at the time, to go to the dentist appointment once every 2 or 3 months for the braces on the teeth. I think by the time I went to high school, I'd probably been to the movies half a dozen times in my life. So no, it was a very rural existence. And I think the great thing about growing up on a farm is it's a family operation. You get to spend a lot of time with your father, which many kids don't in an urban environment because dad goes off to work for the day. Of course, increasingly, mum goes off to work for the day. But you really got to know your family well.
And 4 girls, 4 of you. I guess it was quite competitive as well.
Well, it was, but the great thing about 4 girls was there were no boys, and therefore there was no role differentiation. The girls did everything. And I think what was probably one of the driving factors in my life was that girls did do everything. There were no barriers.
You spent a large chunk of your teen years then going off to a boarding school. And I wonder how you adjusted to that, because that's again a very different environment for what you're used to.
Well, it was perhaps one of the first big step-ups I had to take, because you come out of a little 4-room school in a remote rural district and you're put into a very big competitive city grammar school where in many ways the girls have had a lot more opportunities, access to the museums, the galleries, the range of subjects in their primary and other schools that we hadn't had. So it was quite an adjustment to go to that, but you learn to swim and keep up with the tide.
At that age, did you have any idea of what you'd like to do in life? Did you have any particular goals?
I guess from the time I was a child, I always thought I'd be a teacher because my mother was a teacher, and one's mother is a very powerful role model. And as it happens, the first paid employment I had with my qualifications was as a university teacher. I was a lecturer in the political studies department, and I spent about around 14 years of my life with Auckland University as a student and then as a teacher, and they were very, very happy years.
So you thought that might be the career for you?
Oh, sure, that was a real possibility, that I could have stayed at the university, risen to be a professor. My husband's a professor at the university, so it would have been, in many ways, a pretty good life. But I had the smell of politics to pursue, and that's the choice I took.
Now, your parents were fairly conservative, and I wonder how much that sort of shaped you, how much that influenced the way you saw life as well with that kind of perspective.
Well, there was certainly a generational clash there with different perspectives. And my father was a product of his environment, which was a rural environment, which was in New Zealand conservative. Interestingly, when my parents retired and went to a different environment, their views started to change as well, and they became probably my greatest champions in terms of supporting me and my values. And maybe there was never so much difference between the values, they just ended up getting expressed in different political forms earlier on.
When you went off to Auckland University, you studied political science. What was it that drew you to that at the time?
Funny you ask, because the first thing you do going to university, and there's never much career guidance about this, is you tend to do the things that you did at school. So I chose history, I chose English, and I chose German. And then I met a student just before I enrolled who said, look, I'm doing political study, it's really fascinating. So I added it as a 4th subject. And of course my parents were interested in politics, so it wasn't that unusual. But I wouldn't have thought about it if it hadn't been a chance remark. Well, it came, of course, to really guide my whole career path for decades.
And you became something of a rebel too. You protested against the Vietnam War, you took up issues such as apartheid in South Africa and equality for indigenous people and so on. And I wonder to what degree your parents reacted, or how they reacted when you suddenly were campaigning against a lot of the things they might have kept quiet about.
Well, the apartheid rugby issue with South Africa was certainly a very, very divisive one with my father. He was a passionate rugby supporter, as many New Zealanders are. He'd even gone to South Africa on a rugby tour at the time of apartheid. And of course, to those of us who were young and very motivated by the human rights struggle in South Africa, the idea that our people would go and play segregated teams was quite obnoxious. So there was a real clash over that within the family. And you look back on it really with a bit of a sense of regret that there were years when you couldn't particularly communicate on some of those issues.
Was there a strong, at that time in New Zealand, was there a strong movement among young people to campaign, to come out and protest? Was it really there?
Yes, you see, we grew up in an era where we were well looked after. We didn't have to borrow money for university. As students, we were well catered for. And we were free, if you like, for our studies and for the extracurricular activities. We weren't doing part-time jobs all times of day and night. So that left time to debate Vietnam, debate apartheid, get involved in social movements of that kind. And in many ways, that's what made the university such a wonderful place to be.
Obviously, the debating helped with the politics too, but what about the teaching you did at Auckland University? What skills did that help you develop? Do you think that helped you as a politician later?
I think enormously, because from the time I was in my early 20s, I both had a political track where I was out addressing meetings on behalf of the Labour Party, particularly the Youth Council in earlier years, but I was also teaching. I was standing in front of large audiences of students of all ages. I was dealing in small groups with tutorial groups, and so that set me up well for everything from the cottage meeting to the large auditorium as my political career progressed.
And we'll look at that political career in just a moment. We're going to have more one-on-one with Helen Clark when we return. Welcome back. You're watching One-on-One. We're speaking with the former New Zealand Prime Minister and Administrator of the United Nations Development Programme, Helen Clark. Now, you became the Prime Minister, of course, of your country, which was a big defining moment. It's interesting, you weren't the first female Prime Minister, but you were the first elected female Prime Minister. And you did go on to get 3 consecutive terms, the first to do that as well. In terms of, cutting a path, so to speak, changing what politics was in New Zealand, how different was it, what you were doing?
Well, I broke my head on a lot of glass ceilings along the way. I went to Parliament in 1981 in New Zealand, and there were around 92 members of Parliament then, and we were 8 women. So a very, very small minority, but we were those of us who were elected that year were the post-war baby boomer generation. We'd never experienced a knockback in our lives. We believed that we could do anything and went on to do it. But it was tough. There was a lot of opposition to women. It wasn't understood that women could fulfill these top roles. There was quite a lot of prejudice. And getting there was a battle, particularly getting to be successful as leader of the opposition and winning an election.
I know in an interview you were asked what was it that you loved so much about the job, about politics and being a politician. You said, the ability to make my country a better place. Now I wonder, a lot of the time people feel let down by their politicians, or at least they feel they clash with the politics, the promise of politics and the reality. So how did you make sure that you were focused on what was best for the people, not getting caught up too much in the political wrangling?
Well, this issue of trust was a huge one in New Zealand, because there had been, if you like, a neoliberal revolution when New Zealand went cold turkey on a structural adjustment program. And trust was lost in politicians because it was never openly campaigned on, and there was a feeling that people kept voting and not really getting the result that they wanted. And when I came to government, it was after 3 terms of a Conservative government, and that feeling was there about them, as it had been about the previous Labour government. So I developed, if you like, almost a fetish about saying, I'm not going to promise things I can't do. Now, that means I won't promise as much as some other people out there, but what I do say I'll do, I will deliver, and we really stuck to that. We wouldn't promise things we knew we couldn't pay for or couldn't do.
Now, when you made a lot of promises and you achieved a lot, actually, in your 3 terms, when you look at the range of things you had to tackle, and it is, of course, very broad, what sort of dent do you really feel you made in what you were trying to do? I mean, people always ask, is that length of time
enough to do what you need to do?
Well, 9 years was enough to have quite a substantial impact. Of course, a new government will come along and try to roll back some of the things they never really liked. But I think we got the confidence of the regions in New Zealand up. There was a bit of a feeling that regional New Zealand was on its death knell and populations were drifting to the city. Actually, there's tremendous strength in the regions of New Zealand, and we put a lot of effort into that kind of economic development. We really went very, very hard on Māori development, Indigenous peoples' development issues, and got a lot of pride in a lot of things that were achieved there. Worked hard on issues for women, issues for families, workers' rights issues. It was a very comprehensive reform program, believe me.
And I know you were very keen to put New Zealand on the global map, prove it to be a country that was making a difference in these things, and being a leading country that way. It's interesting, of course, when you look at being somewhere like in America or in Europe, New Zealand seems so far away. I mean, how much of a challenge was it to put New Zealand on the map?
Well, the great thing about New Zealand is almost anywhere you go, people say, where are you from? You say New Zealand. I'd love to go to New Zealand. Of course, from an economic and tourism point of view, you have to convert that desire into a firm intention and then actually booking the ticket. But truly, I think New Zealand is a country which has fostered a very wide range of friendships. You don't really find anyone out there who hates New Zealand. People like New Zealand, and New Zealand is seen as a constructive country, a good partner.
What did you find the most frustrating thing about being a politician?
The most frustrating? Well, firstly, you never get enough sleep. And when I stopped after 9 years as Prime Minister, I probably didn't realise how tired I was, because you do just go on. So you really have very little free time. But look, I never complained about it. It was all voluntary service, willingly done, because you loved what you were doing. But there's no doubt you had to work hard to nurture your own relationships, to keep a space in your life for yourself, because you can go 24/7, and in the end, you're not going to give the best in your public service if you go 24/7.
And in contrast, what's the satisfying part then? What are the winning moments?
Well, the winning moments are seeing something that you've worked really, really hard on become reality. You've got the satisfaction of a job well done. It might be a new law, it might be a new policy, something that you know is going to make a tremendous difference for people.
Of course, as a woman leader and as someone who's pioneering that path in your country, you became a role model for a lot of women. You yourself say that women leaders were role models for you. Who comes to mind with that?
So when I was young, obviously your first role model is your mother. Then there's the teachers, and I was very lucky at my girls' grammar school to have some outstanding teachers who opened our eyes to the world. Then I went to university, had an outstanding associate professor in my department who was a senior woman academic. So there were definitely women role models. Then when I went into politics, of course, I became aware of people like Helen Clark, who had led a small country like New Zealand for a Labour Party like New Zealand's. She was probably in a way the most role model who was out there.
And getting out there among those, what is largely a male club on the international scene when it comes to the heads of state, how did you find it at that time you were Prime Minister? How did you find it, again, getting your voice heard? Well,
what I found was total acceptance. I never felt sitting at those tables, and generally there were very few women at them, if I went to the Commonwealth Summit or APEC or Pacific Island Forum or East Asia Summit or Millennium Summit here at the UN. There weren't many women, but I never felt that I wasn't listened to at all. In fact, in a way, I think I might have been listened to more closely.
What about other mentors? Were there any others who influenced your life along the way?
Yes, most certainly. There was my professor of political studies who I studied under and who then employed me, gave me my chance in academic life. I was very, very close to him and his wife, who were good to generations of students and young teachers at the university. And he took a huge interest in my career and talking issues through and offering advice.
What a lot of countries have the advantage of nowadays, especially small countries, is that technology has helped them to leapfrog, and it's given many countries an opportunity to move forward. And I wonder, when you look at technology, seeing how much it's changed in your lifetime, how much do you easily adapt to it? Are you a person who says, look, I can use the new social media networks, I can use technology to my advantage?
Oh yes, I have my Facebook pages differentiated into different markets, family, friends and and colleagues, a broader public audience, and so on. I'm a great fan of these networks, and I'm using the personal support base that I've long had in New Zealand to really put development issues on Kiwis' agendas as well. But I'm a great believer in technology. I will pick up the latest in phones, the latest in ways of using it.
Can you see it, or new technology, as a tool for achieving the things you want to in the development world?
Yes, because mobilising support for development is about raising awareness, and social media, which is so widely used, are the perfect platform for that. I'm fortunate to have quite a proactive group with UNDP Facebook, and I can download from that, I can put it into my sites, I can really use it to send a message out there about what's happening.
And of course, you have a whole world to deal with. It's a huge responsibility, and it's something that always cuts into personal life, like as you say with the politics. You're a great lover of the arts, particularly opera. Do you get time to indulge in any of that?
Yes, I do. When I was at home, I appointed myself the Minister of Arts, Culture and Heritage. That was really the fun part of my job. And so I've probably been to just about every opera in the classical repertoire, and more than once. I love opera. I love music. I started learning to play the piano myself from about the age of 7. I love theatre.
What about getting downtime, actually getting time for yourself?
Well, it's funnily enough more possible now than it used to be in the little microcosm of New Zealand, where the weekend really wasn't your own. You have a constituency, people want to see you, there's always engagements. I can control that a little bit more now, but what it tends to mean is you don't have the appointments at the weekend, you've still got the pile of paper to work through.
Of course, you have a lot on your plate officially, but in terms of what you'd like to achieve personally, what goals that you have set that you still have to get to, what is there on that list?
But for me personally, well, everything I do I like to do well, of course, so I'd like to think that at the point when I leave UNDP, I'll have an organisation that's very motivated, not to do a whole lot of small projects, but to actually be making a transformational difference to the lives of whole countries and systems. That's what I'm focused on. What's the big picture? What are the strategies? How do we build the capacity to really drive transformational change? So how do we use these transformational tools like new technologies to drive development?
And in terms of legacy, how would you like to be remembered?
How would I like to be remembered? Oh, someone who, I guess, did their best to try and make the world a better place to live in, a more peaceful place, a more just place. The issues I've been involved in all my life are issues of economic and social justice and human rights and peace. That's been my big passion.
Helen Clark, I wish you luck. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.